Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How do I decide if my IP is worth it? My name is Manel Issa from CCIQ, and I will be your facilitator today. Joining us, we have Regan Gooley, who is CEO, Director and Principal with Cullens Patent and Trademark Attorneys. So just a few tips for today. We'll be online for about 30 to 40 minutes. We've got about a half an hour presentation, and after that time there'll be a chance for some questions with Regan. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them through using the text box on the screen. And following the presentation, as usual at CCIQ, we will send you a copy of the presentation with a link to this video recording and any additional supporting info that we have. So don't forget to check your inboxes later today or tomorrow. So on that note, I might hand over to Regan to get us started on how do I decide if my IP is worth it.
Thanks, Manel. Welcome, everybody. Right, now you can see my webinar presenter. I get told all the time that I have to provide some sort of evidence that I'm actually credible to give you advice in the area that I am proposing to give you advice in. This is me. Yes, that is what I look like. Down the bottom is probably the most important thing. My background is in engineering, but I also have a commerce degree and a law degree, which is probably more appropriate, or the more appropriate side of the background to today's discussion. I am a patent and trademark attorney, but really I'm okay. I'm a normal person, or at least I try. I'm not a solicitor, so I won't propose to give you any legal advice. I have a law degree, but not a solicitor, so keep that upper in your minds. We might jump straight in because there is a bit of information to get through in 30 minutes. I guess the starting point is ideas and value. One of the questions that we as patent and trademark attorneys are asked most often is this a good idea? You know, what do you think? Things like that. And I guess this slide is instructive on the answer to that question. My response is always there's no idea that's a great idea, there's no idea that's a stupid idea. It's all about the execution of the idea. From a purely IP point of view, you can come to me and have the best protectable invention in the world, but it might be commercially irrelevant. It might not solve a problem, it might cost too much, it might be too complex, people might not understand it and then not buy it. So from an IP point of view, really good idea, but from a commercial perspective, completely useless. So I guess what today is about is giving you one framework, and I say that a number of times. It is only one framework in order to try and evaluate IP, if you like, to try and give you an answer to whether it is worth investing more money and time in, because that's what we're talking about in this slide here. You want an indication of the risk associated with the project, and the risk is generally it's related to, and the trade-off I expect is with the payoff. So if you can work out how much risk is involved and the cost in time, money and effort, and then you can compare that to your expected payoff, you're at least in a position to make a decision about whether it's sort of a go, no-go trigger. Because the worst thing in the world is, you have an idea and you immediately start spending money on either commercializing the idea or getting some IP protection or something like that. You leap in with both feet. Then you do some searching, or you have a patent examined or something like that, for example, and you find out there's either something out there that's the same that you could have found relatively easily, or on the flip side, you begin to commercialize it and you work out that the market that you thought was there really wasn't there. So what you really need is sort of an easy way to sort out one from the other fairly early on, so that, as I said, you can work out whether you invest more money and time in it with the potential of getting a payoff, which you also try and quantify, or whether you just say, look, it's a good idea, but really what I'm being told from my evaluation is it's not really going to fly. So if you can get that stuff early, you can save yourself a lot of money, time and heartache, because everyone's emotionally invested in these things as well. You can save yourself all of those issues if you can find out early enough whether it's a go or a no-go. So that's sort of what we're here today to find out. So what you want out of a system of evaluation like that is you need to be, as the word implies, it needs to be systematic. You need to cover enough of the issues to get a fully rounded idea of whether it's going to be viable or not. You know, I work in intellectual property, and I tend to treat intellectual property as a nice confined question. I tend to advise only on intellectual property, but the problem with ideas and commercialization of ideas is you need, you know, a whole other raft of questions to be answered. You need the legal questions answered. You need the marketing questions answered. You need, you know, the design question answered and things like that. So provided you get a whole view of what's involved, it's much easier to make a decision, because focusing too much on one of the areas and neglecting any one or more of the other areas can lead you to a false result, if you like. So you need a system that's those things: easy, cheap, not too time consuming. It needs to be systematic, and more than anything, it needs to be comprehensive. So what we're trying to do today is give you some guidelines as to what a system of evaluation like that might look like, and give you some criteria that you can work through yourself in order to work out, get you to that go, no-go sort of point. I did note at the bottom that evaluation is not usually well received by the person being evaluated. I know that I don't take criticism particularly well. Sometimes it's hard to stomach someone saying, well, maybe that's not the best way of doing it, particularly when that is the way that you are doing it currently. So therefore, this evaluation system is a self-evaluation system. And what it's designed to do is really flag issues or make you ask more questions where the answers to the questions are problematic. So it's designed to throw up flags in the areas where you may or may not need a bit more further thought, a bit more investigation, but it is self-guided. And that way, you don't really have someone else telling you what to do. It's a self-driven, you get to identify the problems. You need to be sensible about it, and you need to be fairly harsh and have this unbiased, unemotional attachment to it. So the harsher you are, generally, the better, the more likely you are to get something out of it. So it is self-evaluation, but we'll leap straight in. This is just one mechanism for evaluation, if you like. It's based on a system that was developed by a guy called Gerald Udell in the US. And if you want to Google it later, it's actually called the PIES system, P-I-E-S, as in meat pie. And PIES stands for Preliminary Invention Evaluation System. So he basically sat down, and his background is all about commercialization and the things that either make or break a business or an idea. And he identified these 6 areas. He called them criteria, but these 6 areas, which basically then he broke down into further sub-criteria, which if you work through and answer the questions in each of the areas, you build up a picture, a comprehensive picture of whether something like this is or is not likely to be viable. I'll also get out in front of it now. The first 2 pictures were mine. I tried to be fun. The rest of them, probably less fun. I didn't actually do those, so I apologise for the pictures at the bottom, but we'll soldier on. So the first of the criteria that we need to look at within this evaluation framework is what's called societal criteria. And they're things like the legality of the product or the method that you want to use, the safety, the environmental impact, and the general society, so the benefit that may or may not be realised because of the idea. So the legality, I should say right at the top, some of these questions, and I think I say it at the end of this presentation as well, the answer to some of these questions are deemed to be critical questions or critical answers. So, for example, if in the legality question you look at your product and say, does the product break any applicable laws or regulations or will offend some product standard, if it's more likely than not that you will offend a law, regulation, or not comply with a product standard, then that's a critical question. So that one will need to be resolved early, because if it can't be resolved or the product is never going to meet an applicable law or regulation, then that's going to be a red flag for a no-go, don't go any further. So the more work you do on your product might lead to changes in the answers. So although you do this evaluation early on, and you'll see from the follow-up more comprehensive evaluation that we'll send you at the end after the webinar, the answers to the questions may change the more work you do. So it might start out where your product doesn't apply or doesn't comply with applicable laws or regulations, but you do some work on it, you do some redesign and things like that, and it may then become a complying product. So the questions or the answers to these questions are not stagnant. They do change depending on how much work you do, but you do it at the start and then you might do it after significant redesign, and just to see whether the answers have changed. But some of them are critical, and if you get bad answers to some of these questions, which are pretty much self-evident, you'll be able to pick the ones that are inherent no-go flags. So that's the legality one. Safety is a similar type of things. You need to consider what the potential hazards are and what the potential side effects of the product are. As I said, you have to be fairly harsh on these things. If you invent a toy and the toy's got small parts, then the potential hazard and the potential side effect in this area, if you're selling that toy to children, can be quite high. So safety involves not only identification of the hazard and/or the side effect, but also the criticality of the hazard, if you like. If a child breaks off a small part of your toy and eats it and chokes, then that's going to cause some serious damage. So that should be you should err on the side of safer rather than less safe. But that's the sort of question you need to ask in relation to your product and the safety aspects. Environmental aspects, I mean, obviously if you're inventing air conditioners with chlorofluorocarbons and they've been outlawed, then you're going to have more problems with that sort of invention getting public acceptance. Equally, if you've invented a 20-litre car that chews petrol at 4 gallons per 10 kilometres, you're going to chew fuel fairly much, and you need to fit these things within the context of social acceptance, which is why it's called a societal criteria. Is someone more likely to buy a Prius because they're a green friendly car or a 6.4 litre Hemi V8 Chrysler SRT? They're more likely to go for the Prius in certain markets. There is only a more limited market for the Chrysler because of the type of car that it is. And public opinion is really moving more towards the environmental stuff at the moment. So consider that as a part of these criteria as well. As I said, there's a scale for all of these, which you'll see from the more comprehensive one as to where you sit. And the general societal impact is the last one in this criteria. That is it going to be a general improvement in the standard of society, or is it going to be overall a detriment to society? Most people are fairly rigorous on this one. Everyone thinks that their invention is going to improve society, but you have to balance the costs and the benefits, if you like. If you're going to get a big environmental impact, a positive environmental impact, but it's going to cost you a lot to get there, that's less positive than it might otherwise be. So they're the societal criteria. The first part only, as I said, there's 6 of these criteria that you work through. The next one is business risk. And I've put business risk criteria 1 because there's actually 2 pages, because there's quite a few of these. Obviously, the best idea in the world that doesn't make you any money is not the best idea in the world. It might be an altruistic aim. It might fulfill all of the societal criteria, and its benefit may be to society, and you may go into it with that view. But long term, you will find that most things that have the not-for-profits are not really not-for-profit. They still have to make some money in order to justify their existence. I'm not aware of a single not-for-profit that doesn't actually make any money. They still have to pay for themselves somehow. So the business risk criteria are important. So you need to look at things like functional feasibility. Will it actually do what you intended or claim it will do? You don't need to get to a prototype level to be able to say, yes, functionally it is. You can make that decision fairly soon or fairly quickly, fairly early on. Is it likely to do it, or is it absolutely unlikely to do it? Rat traps are a classic example. Does it actually catch the rat? If it doesn't catch the rat, then functional feasibility is 0. If it does catch the rat, or is likely to catch the rat, functional feasibility is quite high. So you need to look at those sorts of things. Production feasibility, this is one that's often overlooked when people come to us and say, I've got, this really good invention. You go, yeah, that is a really good invention. How are you going to make it? Is it difficult to make? Does it have a lot of parts? Is it made from components that are difficult to source or expensive? Can you get these things into the country relatively easy? So you need to make an early on call about how hard it is going to be to actually produce this thing. That sort of goes with the next one. So what stage of development are you at? Some people come to us with drawings on a page. Some people come to us with a prototype virtually ready to go. Obviously, the more market ready your stage of development is, the more likely you are to score more highly in this one, and therefore more likely to be a success. You've also probably overcome some of the design problems already, and some of those production feasibility problems as well. So the further you are in the development, or the stage of development, generally the better it's going to be as well. Investment costs, how much money are you going to need to commercialise these things? If you're making, a new paperclip made out of bent wire, then the production capital for that's probably going to be fairly low before you can start punching out hundreds of the things. But if you're making a new engine, you're going to need significant amount of capital to not only build the engine but then test it and things like that. So the amount of money that you need to invest to get it to at least the initial period of production is important for you to think about early on, and that leads into the payback period. If you're looking at spending $100,000 and your payback period is 1 year, then that's a reasonable, an acceptable level of risk. If you're going to spend $100,000 and your potential payback period is 10 years, then that's risk over a much longer time, which makes that risk much less acceptable. So you need to think about, and at least you can do financial modelling for this, and your accountants can do things like that. So you need to think about those types of things as well. How long is it going to be before it starts to pay for itself? Because I can tell you, most inventions and the commercialisation of most inventions fall over because you run out of money. That's pretty much how it works. So payback period is directly linked to profitability. So I've put down 3 different types of costs there. This is where the accountant in me comes out. There are 3 different types of general costs: the direct costs, the indirect costs, and the capital costs. If you can get some sort of approximation for each of those, you can work out how long your payback period is, when your break-even point is, how many of these things do you have to sell or make a year to start making money, to start eating into your investment money. It's like anything. It's like buying a house for the purposes of rent. If you're not negative gearing, the purpose of that house is to pay for itself. Then you don't have to tip any money in. So the sooner you can get to the point where it's paying for itself, the better it is for you. So, you need to consider and maybe get other advisors in to see whether they can work out how profitable it's going to be and what the payback period is going to be. Similarly with market research, not everyone is a marketer. Not everyone has the ability to work out whether something is going to be difficult or complex or costly to market. It's one of those things that, most professional organisations, and I know we do, we pay people to work out the marketing strategy and things like that. But it's always good to sit down and see if you can work out these things yourselves. The more information you can get out of it, the more of an appreciation you might have for the weak points in your position. And if you've got the weak points, you can either overcome the weak points or you can turn that into a no-go trigger. So again, you need to look at the marketing side of it. And what the market is. And the last one in the business risk is the research and development. Is there further research and development needs to be done? Is that going to be difficult, complex, or costly? For some, biotech inventions, for example, research and development's long, it's very costly, the lead time's massive, and you're pumping money into it for, what can be 10 to 15 years before you see payback. And if you can identify that sort of stuff early on, it provides you with a framework to be able to say, right, I either A, know what I'm in for, or B, I'm not willing to accept that sort of long-term risk and cost. So again, it puts you in a position to say, well, that is a no-go trigger for me if that one is too much. So that was the business risk stuff. Sort of a subset or a sideline to that is your demand analysis. I will say up the front that a lot of people have unrealistic expectations of their demand. The number of people that I see walk into my place and say, oh, this is going to sell 1 million. And you sit there and go, I don't know on what basis you're saying that, because it may sell 1 million, it may not sell 1 million. I can tell you that most things don't sell 1 million. The number of open quote overnight successes are really people who have been in the game for 15 or 20 years and failed a number of times before they're an overnight success. So a lot of stuff falls down because the potential market for the product is not as big or as well developed as you think. So you can look at things like the total market for the type of product, not necessarily your particular product, but the type of product. So what's it intended to do? What problem is it intended to solve? And what is the market for solutions to that particular problem? Painting your house is a solution to one problem, and that problem is if you don't paint your house, then the sun damages your house. But there are a lot of other solutions to that problem other than painting the house. You can, extend your roof line so that the sides of the house get more shade and things like that. So potential market, you can look at the type of the problem, the type of solution, more so than your type of solution. You can look at things like potential sales, so you can sort of try and gauge what your potential sales might be in terms of competitor products. So what's already out there, how much are they selling, how much of that market do you expect to take? Again, you want to be fairly conservative, because if you're fairly conservative, you've prepared for the worst. You can hope for the best, but at least you've prepared for the worst. You can also look at things like the trend of demand. If you came to me and said, oh, I've got a new handset that you can plug into the wall in your home, I would say, yeah, don't bother. That is not even a declining market. That market is dead. So you can look at things about, whether the market size for your particular solution is either declining, steady, or expanding. If it's expanding, you're going to be on the right side of the ledger. Steady is not too bad, but a declining market is really not good. You can also look at the stability of that demand, whether it's stable or unstable. Some products are really cyclical. A few years ago, or probably more than a few years ago, I'm showing my age, there were a lot of water-saving inventions on the market. The demand was high, but the demand was also unstable, because as soon as we got a bit of rain, all of those inventions, or the need for all of those inventions, dried up. So you need to be looking at how stable the demand is as well. Is it a long-term stability? Is it a short-term stability? Is it just unstable and very cyclical? Product life cycle. Some things have a 2-year life cycle. Some things have a 6-month life cycle. Some things have a 20-year life cycle. So if you can get some gauge on what the life cycle is, the life cycle also allows you to build in a little bit to the price. If you've got a short life cycle, people will be replacing them more often. It might be better to pitch them at a lower price point than you may otherwise think. If it's a longer life cycle and people are going to buy one and keep it for 20 years, they're probably prepared to pay a premium for a longer term product. The old adage at the moment is everything's made to be broken, everything's made to be replaceable now. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, it just depends. So with your product, you need to look at it from that point of view and see what that life cycle is. And product line potential is something that not a lot of people talk about. Basically that is, if I produce this product, what additional products can I make? So if I produce a paintbrush that's new, can I also then bring out other products like a roller or a paint tray or a cleaning box for that paintbrush? So what types of things might be additional products to extend the product line? How much, how many am I going to sell? That type of thing. That can allow you to build more of a picture up. Market acceptance criteria. This is related to the demand, but you need to look at these types of things. Is it compatible with existing attitudes and methods? We'll go back to the Prius and the 6.4 litre V8. How much learning is involved? You pick up an iPhone or a child picks up an iPhone and they can use it virtually straight away. I pick up an iPhone and I need a serious amount of training. I can't even use Facebook. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But how much training is going to be required for someone to use your thing or method? Is it a need or a want? If it's a need, is it a high need or a low need? To work out, again, where's your demand coming from? If it's something that people need and they need it now, then they're going to buy it now. If they can't get it from you, they're going to get it from someone else. If it's just a want, they're going to be prepared to buy it, but they might not be prepared to pay a premium for it, whereas if it's a need, they will pay a premium for it. Is it dependent on other products? So, is it a video recorder where you need a TV to play it through? If the TV market falls out or people put video recorders in TVs, that kills the video recorder market. So things like that. Visibility is one of them. How visible are the advantages and benefits? Are they self-evident or are they not self-evident? If they're not self-evident, then you're going to need to pay more money to promote them. So the higher visibility of the advantages and benefit, the less money you can spend on the promotion, which decreases the cost and the effort. So you need to look at things like that. The other things to think about here are, how are you going to distribute it? And if it needs to be, how are you going to service it? Or are you going to service it? Or is that someone else's problem? So, what other things come out of the product? Then there are things like the competitive criteria. This is all really related to what's already out there in the market. So you can see from the picture at the bottom, some things, really good idea, but really not going to sell. Someone's going to fall out of that bet on the right, or the right as we look at it. Whereas the one on the left, much nicer. So you want to really take a hard look at what your product or service or method or idea is compared to the things that are around. If the best in show was the thing on the right and someone came out with the one on the left, it's going to sell simply because it's much easier to use. It may be a little bit more expensive in the price bracket, but it's going to last a lot better. It's going to function a lot better as a bed. So there's a trade-off between those four different points, and you see them as the 4 Ps sometimes. This is just a slightly different look at it because some of the Ps are included in the other criteria. So just something to think about again. You need to look at the existing competition, whether it's direct or indirect. Is someone going to take market share away from you because they're a direct competitor, they have a product that does the same job? Or is there something out there that people don't use at the moment but they can use? So look at those sorts of things. You also need to think about whether there's, your launch onto the market is going to cause a competitive reaction and have someone else out there say, that's a really good idea, I need to get me some of that. He's making money from it, I can do it too. So that type of thing, sometimes when smartphones weren't really popular until Apple made them popular, and now every man and their dog's got one, and cats, by the way. So you need to look at it, again, fairly harshly from the, if I make a goer of this, is someone going to try to compete with me? Which is where the next question comes in, which is the only IP-related question in it. Can you get protection for it? So if you can get protection for it, then you can keep those competitors at bay for a certain period of time if you're prepared to enforce it. Enforcement is expensive, so you should think about that as well. But, can you protect something? If you can protect it, you probably should. Some people don't, but I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So, as I said, that's the only IP thing in the entire evaluation system. One of the most overlooked parts of these evaluations as to whether an idea is going to work or not is the experience that the people have that are around the idea. So technology transfer is the first one. How are you going to make money out of it? Are you going to sell it or are you going to license it? If you're going to license it to someone else, do you have any experience in that? Do you know somebody who might potentially want to license it? If they do, what is the potential for that technology transfer? Is it high or low? If it's not high, then you're really trying to get this thing off the ground yourself, which is the new venture part. can you start a new business to do this? If you cannot, then your only option is license if you want to get it off the ground. And these two sort of feed on one another or into one another. And the last thing you sort of want to think about in the new venture technology transfer is, if you're going to set up a new venture, what is your initial, how are you going to get it out there? Like, what's your launch strategy? If you can, or have access to, relatively large groups of people, you might be able to do a public launch at not very much money. Are there organisations around there that can do that sort of thing for you? The last couple of points on this is all sets of experience that you don't necessarily need to have it, but if you don't, then who does? You need to look at yourself and say, do I have marketing experience, technical experience, financial experience, management experience? From my experience, not everyone has all of these things. Some people have some of them. Some people have more than some of them. Some people are, relatively low on the financial, but they're good on the management. Some people are good technicians, but really don't know how to market. So you need access to all of these types of people, all of these different sets of experience. You may have them. They may be around, but accessing an appropriate experienced advisor early on can really help you a lot. All of those 6 things really lead you into one question. What is the product, idea, service? What is its overall market attractiveness? All of these things feed into this one question that provides you with an answer, if you like, to whether this particular opportunity has a risk that is good or bad. Is it a high risk? Is it a low risk? Taking all of those factors into consideration. So once you step through it, and it'll become a lot more clear once you actually get this particular evaluation sheet, because it has some of the answers and allows you to gauge things a little bit more easily. But overall, this is what you're driving towards. Is it overall more attractive than less attractive? Once you can answer that question, you can really put yourself in a position to work out whether it's a go, no-go. And I keep saying that, but that's really what you're looking for. Early on, am I going to spend more money and time and effort on it, or am I just giving myself a hiding for nothing? So the summary, it's really short. This is only one evaluation system. It's the one that I am most familiar with. It is not the only evaluation system. As it says there, it is a guideline only. It's intended to prompt you to give some thought to the portions of your idea or the commercialization of the idea that may or may not be no-go triggers, if you like. It will not make the decision for you. Ultimately, you still have to make that decision, but what it tries to do is give you a systematic and comprehensive framework to allow you to actually make the decision. So that's the end. I think that's questions. I hope that helped. I hope there are some questions. Feel free, have a lash, and I'll hand back to Manel to facilitate the question session.
Great. Thanks so much, Regan. Thanks for taking the time to present. It, as Regan has said, is time for the Q&A, and we have had a couple of questions come through. So the first one, once I've figured out that my IP is worth it, I've done the go or no go, and it is a go, what's the next step? What do I do from there?
Oh, big question. Look, once you've made the decision that you do want to proceed with it, you'll probably want to do a number of things sort of all at the same time. And they will really be based on things that you have to do at a particular time in order to make it a go. So something like intellectual property protection, for example, you can't file or you can't get a patent for something that is already public. So it needs to be a secret when the patent application is filed. So that's fairly early on in the piece. You don't need to set up a comprehensive trust structure or corporate structure in order to take funds out or give you tax protection at that early stage. That stuff can come a bit later. You will need to do a bit more design work. As I said, the further you are down the design and the clarification of the design, the settling of the design, if you like, the better it is, because particularly if they're looking for investment, it's very hard to attract investors if you don't have something to show them. It's much easier to convince someone that your idea is a good one if you can put it down on the table and say, this is the problem, here is the solution, and here it's why it's the solution. So it's a very lukewarm answer to a very general question. Certain things need to be done at certain stages. The most powerful thing you can do once you have decided that you do want to proceed is start asking people questions. Because I'm an IP attorney, use a non-disclosure agreement if you're going to tell anyone anything that's particularly private, but the access that you can get to advisors that know more about the particular areas than you, the earlier you can get that, the more likely you are to be successful. So that's what I would say to that one.
Great. Thanks so much. And the next one we have, can you protect your product if it includes someone else's IP? We've got here, for example, extrusions.
Look, you certainly can. It comes with a proviso. If an extrusion is a difficult one because an extrusion is so simple, you may be able to protect your product provided that it has taken a known product and has developed that known product further or added other features to that known product. The proviso or rider that comes with that is you may need the permission of the IP rights holder for the original to go further, but that is something that you can always work out if you know that there is a right. The worst thing that I find in my job is someone gears up to start making a product and they've taken steps to protect the product and all that sort of stuff, and then something comes out in a search that makes the proposed product an infringement of an earlier IP right. Nothing will kill a good idea or a new idea faster than someone else owning the IP to it. So what I would say, again, a very generic answer, you can protect products or your product if it has made changes to an existing product, even if that existing product has IP on it by someone else. It's just a matter of knowing what you're in for. So provided that you know where it is, who owns it, you can generally negotiate licenses or things like that, but you can still protect your product incorporating someone else in some circumstances, yes.
Great. The questions are coming in thick and fast. We may not have time to get to all of them. I know. The next one we have, how long does it take to get a patent? Straightforward?
Relatively straightforward. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks to file a patent application. To actually get the patent, to have a patent granted, timelines vary. The fastest you can get a patent granted in Australia is about 6 to 8 weeks. The fastest overseas varies depending on where it is. The fastest you can get a US patent is generally about a year. Fastest you can get a European patent is probably about 3 or 4. But you can get access to the patent system and get your idea protected quickly. Generally about 2 to 3 weeks from getting the information from you. We write up the document or do whatever's necessary. We send it out to you. You approve it. It gets filed. Once it's filed, it's go time for you.
Great. The next question we have is around that market research topic. How do you get access to the types of information that you need, and where can you access this so-called big data?
That's a problem with big data. It's everywhere. Look, there are organisations. A lot of the big data stuff is held in databases that are only accessible to subscribers. There's a lot of free information out there. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has a lot of information. Generally, the problem with big data is how do you get specific information or information specific to you or your particular issue. But there are organisations out there who actually will mine big data subscription databases for you, provided they know what you want answered. There are market research companies out there that can access all that sort of stuff. The CCIQ can probably have access to some of these things as well. So again, it's more a matter of knowing where to go to get access to it once you know, but there are people out there who can help you access it. It might be a little bit difficult and or expensive to access it yourself, but if you can find the people who have access to it, generally you can use their subscriptions to get into it, and they can design feedback and stuff like that for you.
Great. So I think we have time for just one more question. What do I do if the product gets copied? So is it expensive to take legal action? Companies can copy and make products pretty quickly these days. So what's our recourse?
In a simple word, yes, it is expensive. Um, Look, it goes back to the overriding thing. IP protection is like insurance. If you've got it, you can use it. If you don't have it, you've got nothing. So my first tip would be get some if you can. The second tip, if you find someone that copies, they're only copying it because you're making money. People don't copy things that you're not making any money out of. Then you have to look at whether the amount of money you're making is significant enough, and it generally will be if they're copying it. It's either that or they're a direct competitor who hates your guts. It's an emotional thing. There are a variety of things that you can do, even given the expense, though. A typical patent infringement case in Australia is going to start at, $100,000. You don't need to be in those patent infringement cases, though. Most, probably 9 out of 10 patent infringement cases doesn't actually go to court. It's settled before court. So the settlement process is important. Who you get to facilitate that settlement can be important. And if worse comes to worst, again, if you're deciding whether to go to court, you can at least have some friends or allies in that court. So, do you look at licensing your invention if you've got the protection, because that's the only way you can license it? Do you look at licensing it to one of the bigger players in the field and then saying to that bigger player, right, I will license this invention to you provided that you police the marketplace. And by the way, I know your biggest competitor down the road is actually cheating or copying the product. So I will license it to you provided that you take action against them. So you don't have to do all of this yourself because it is very expensive. You can do some of the preliminaries yourself, but you don't have to do the whole thing. But, people are out there. If the product is good enough that it's getting copied, then there'll typically be more than one person that wants to do it. So you can generally cherry pick between them to pick an ally that's got some cash behind them.
Great. I think that's all we have time for. There are a couple of questions, but what we'll do is send them through to Regan, and after the webinar, he'll be able to handle those directly. There were a couple of interesting ones, but we unfortunately have no time for that. So I just wanted to thank Regan for taking the time to present today. The next upcoming webinar that we do have, feel free to tune into, which will be tomorrow. Alton will be presenting about business valuations for SMEs and understanding how goodwill is valued in businesses as well. You can access that on the CCIQ events page, so make sure you click in. I think that's the last one before the Christmas period of our webinar series, but do tune in early next year if you can't catch that one. Thanks so much, Regan, for your time today, and thank you all for tuning in.